Hello guys, and thanks for joining me in another episode. Now in today's video we're going to be checking out some of the weirdest surf spot names in the world. Now while around the world there's many like boring generic surf spot names that basically describes what the wave is or where it is, there's some interesting names as well, and in today's video we're going to take a look at the most weird and wonderful surf spot names and how those names came to be. First up, we head to Hawaii, to Pipeline, and specifically Banzai Pipeline. It's one of the most notorious waves in the world. It needs no introduction. It's a very heavy wave. It's a wave that was once dominated and still is dominated by the local contingent. And we've all seen it, you know, we don't need to explain what Pipeline is or talk any more about it. It's already been covered to death. Now, the two parts to the name Banzai Pipeline actually come from two different things. So Banzai is actually a Japanese war cry that in World War II, Japanese soldiers would scream that. So it's like a charging war cry. So that's where the Banzai part of the name comes from. Pipeline, although it actually does describe the shape of the wave because it's a perfect, you know, curled over wave, it looks like a pipe, wasn't actually called Pipeline because of that. It was actually to do with a pipeline being constructed across the beach from where Pipeline is when it was first being surfed. So there was a big construction pipeline, like a stormwater drain type thing across the road from the wave. And that's why it got called Pipeline, because when it was getting surfed in those early years, this pipeline was like ever present and it got named that. Next we've got Winky Pop. So it's a pretty weird name, and the story of how it got that name is even weirder. So from what I've read online, early surfers from Melbourne that would come down and surf Bells Beach were traveling one day and they had this girl with them whose code name for sexual intercourse was Winky Pop. So they basically started joking, saying, and you know, talking with this name. And then one day when they went to surf Bells, they paddled down to where Winky Pop is, which if you haven't been there, it's like the reef next to it. Surfed down there, and when they were getting back over the rocks after their surf, they saw two crabs having sex on the rocks. And then they were like, oh look, they're having a Winky Pop. And then that's how the name for the break came about. How true that story is, I don't know. I've just read it a couple of times online, so it's a pretty funny story. Any more information on that, please let me know down in the comments. Speaking of names and pronunciation, if you guys watch my channel regularly, you'll know that languages and pronunciation is not my strong point. And that's where today's video sponsor comes in. Now, LingoPie changes the way you learn languages through TV, music, and film. It's a bit like the Netflix of language learning, you know. You log on, you've got a selection of TV shows and films from around the world. There's loads of cool tools and features that allow you to learn things really easily. The subtitles are all interactive, so you'll be able to click on individual words, learn how to pronounce them correctly. So it's really easy to sort of learn as you watch. There's also like flashcards and quizzes that you can use as well. I've just got started with LingoPie. It's really fun. I'm going to try and do an hour a day and just really try and brush up on my Spanish. So if you want to check LingoPie out, they offer a 7-day free trial. I'll leave the link which contains my unique discount code down in the description. But for now, let's crack on with the video. Next to Cloudbreak, one of the most iconic waves on Earth, and you want to find out more about Cloudbreak, check out my full breakdown to the history of the place. It's got a really interesting history and how it was discovered and how it became privatized and then later deprivatized, so I'll leave the link up there where you can check that out. So the name Cloudbreak actually comes from the native Fijian language, Nakuru Kuru Malagi. Definitely butchering that pronunciation, but that name in English translates to Thundercloud Reef, and Cloudbreak, yeah, the name derives from that. And yeah, that name is a very fitting description of the wave. Very powerful, very shallow, very heavy. If you haven't seen the Thundercloud documentary, I'd highly recommend it. Basically tells the story of that 2012 swell, so again, I'll leave the link in the description where you can check that out. Next, we head to the Maldives, and specifically to Pasta Point. So Pasta Point is the famous and exclusive wave in the Maldives. Perfect left-hander with sections for tubes and turns. Really sick wave. The reason it's called Pasta Point is because originally there was an Italian-owned surf camp resort right there on the rocks in front of the wave. They used to make loads of pasta and noodles and things like that, and whatever was left over at the end of the day they used to just chuck out and throw on the rocks. Sometimes pasta would float out into the lineup. On the rocks there was always pasta everywhere, so the surfers who first surfed it would often see the pasta everywhere, and therefore they named it Pasta Point. Another one, similar story to how Pasta Point got its name, was Macaronis. You know, what that perfect, ridiculously fun-looking left-hander in the Mentawai was named Macaronis after the guys who discovered it were basically eating a bowl of macaroni cheese whilst they were talking about what they should name the wave, so it seemed pretty fitting. Now, Macaronis is interesting because it actually was kept a secret for 10 years after the discovery of the wave. There's a really interesting story on how they discovered the wave and why they kept it a secret, so I'll leave the link in the description where you can check that out. Next, we head to the Philippines and to the island of Siargao, or Cloud 9. Now, Cloud 9 was discovered by a couple of surfers traveling on Siargao. They came across this wave and originally they named it Jacking Horse, a testament to the abrupt nature in which it curled over and broke. You know, it's a slabby A-frame wave. But a few years later, the break was renamed after a trip of American pros and photographers headed to Siargao to cover the wave, and they obviously didn't know it was called Jacking Horse, so they renamed it Cloud 9 after a local chocolate bar that was said to be one of the only snacks available on Siargao at the time. So their between surf fuel ups were these Cloud 9 chocolate bars, and hence they named the wave after the chocolate bar. Next we head back to the Maldives, and this time to the island of Telusadu. Now, Telusadu is home to a few different waves breaking in its proximity, but Cokes is the main wave on the island. It's a really fun, wally right-hander. When it's good, can throw out tubes and be really long, really perfect. Pretty fun for turns on just any given day. But the way it got its name was because there is a massive Coca-Cola factory on the island of Telusadu. Well, I say massive, it's not that big, but it's quite weird that there's a random Coca-Cola factory in the middle of this pristine island. You know, there's nothing really around it. It's all perfect water and sand. It's like a dreamy Maldivian island. But then in the middle of the island, there's just a big Coca-Cola factory, and that was one of the only things on the island back in the day when the wave was being discovered. So because of that, they named it Coca-Colas or Cokes. To Barbados now, and to one of the most iconic waves in the Caribbean. Now, Soup Bowl on Barbados is a famous wave, right-hand reef break, can get really hollow, or it can just be really fun for turns. Kelly Slater named it as one of his top 3 favourite waves. Now, the way the name Soup Bowl came about is that the surfers who first discovered it, they arrived to surf it on a really, really big swell. So as the waves came in, they did so with a lot of energy and a lot of force. It was sucking lots of water off the reef, and that basically created loads of boils bubbling up in front of the wave, and it made it look like a bowl of boiling hot soup. So that's why they called it Soup Bowl. So much energy moving around out there, lots of boils and bubbles, and Soup Bowl seemed like a pretty apt name for it. I've never actually been to Barbados. It seems like a really shallow, hollow wave, but looks really fun as well, especially when it's just normal and not heaving. But yeah, looks like a really, really cool place to check out. Please let me know if you've surfed it. Next, we head to the Mentawai, to Lancer's Right, or HTs. Now, this is an interesting one because, like Cloud 9, it's kind of got 2 names. Originally, it was called Lancer's Right after Lance Knight, the guy who discovered it, went to hunt for waves on the island and came across what is now known as one of the best waves in the world, camped in the jungle for a couple of weeks, surfed it on his own. Then a boat of other surf explorers turned up and they kind of found the wave roughly at the same time. So then the wave got called Lancer's Right after Lance. But then a few years later, a group of American pros came and surfed the wave, not knowing it actually had the name of Lancer's Right. And there was a big hollow tree basically wedged in the reef, and in the background of the early photos and footage of the place, you can see this tree in the background of some of the shots. So it got called Hollow Trees instead. So that's why you often hear it referred to as Hollow Trees or Lancer's Right. You know, it's the same place. Lastly, to Snapper Rocks on Australia's east coast. Now the rocks at Snapper themselves are actually the result of an ancient volcano. It was actually lava that flowed into the water and then cooled down. Now they're these like razor sharp rocks that stick out to form the top of the superbank. The name actually came from a boat, W.L. Edmondson. Now the boat captain of the vessel HM Colonial Cutter Snapper decided to name the rocks they were passing Snapper after the vessel that he was on, so that's why they're called Snapper Rocks. So that's basically a rundown of some of the most interesting surf spot names in the world. Please let me know if you've got any more information and backstory about how these names came about. As well, if you know any other spots that are already famous, obviously if it's like a secret spot, don't tell me. But yeah, there's quite a lot of interesting spot names around the world. As always, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please subscribe because it helps my channel grow more than you know. But for now, it's goodbye from me and I'll see you in the next vid.